Chosen one, stop scrolling and listen to me for the next few minutes. Because what I'm about to tell you may explain something you've been feeling but couldn't put into words. Someone thought they had the perfect plan for you. They thought every detail was covered. They thought they knew exactly what you would do, exactly how you would react, and exactly where you would eventually fall. They thought the trap was invisible. They thought you were walking into their setup without realizing what was happening. But they made one serious mistake. They underestimated what God had already developed inside of you. They underestimated your discernment. They underestimated your ability to observe without reacting. They underestimated the wisdom you gained through every betrayal, every disappointment, every closed door, every strange situation, and every season when God forced you to become quieter and more aware. And now they're shocked because you didn't take the bait. You saw something they thought you would never notice. You caught the inconsistency. You noticed the strange timing. You felt the pressure behind the invitation. You recognized that the smile didn't match the intention. You saw the pattern beneath the words. And instead of rushing forward like they expected, you stepped back. You became silent. You watched. You prayed. And that one decision may have completely destroyed the plan they had prepared against you. Let me ask you something, chosen one. Have you ever had a situation that looked almost too perfect, but something inside you said, wait? Have you ever been offered an opportunity, invited somewhere, contacted by someone, or pulled into a conversation, and you couldn't explain it, but your spirit told you not to move so quickly? Maybe you thought you were being paranoid. Maybe you questioned yourself. Maybe you even felt guilty for stepping away. But what if that hesitation wasn't weakness? What if it was protection? What if God was giving you discernment before giving you evidence? Because sometimes God won't show you the entire trap. He'll simply give you enough discomfort to keep you from stepping into it. Sometimes He doesn't reveal every hidden motive. He simply removes your desire to participate. Sometimes He doesn't expose the person immediately. He just makes you uncomfortable enough to stop trusting what doesn't feel right. And this is what makes the situation so powerful. They were expecting the old you. They expected the version of you who would react immediately, explain everything, defend yourself, chase answers, seek approval, or become emotional under pressure. They thought they knew which buttons to push. They thought they could create confusion and watch you panic. They thought they could make you desperate enough to walk straight into their plan. But they didn't know what God had been doing in your private season. They didn't see the nights you prayed when nobody was watching. They didn't see the lessons you learned through pain. They didn't see how disappointment taught you to observe. They didn't see how betrayal taught you boundaries. They didn't see how rejection taught you not to chase what doesn't choose you. They didn't see how God transformed your reaction into discernment. Chosen one, listen to me carefully, because what I'm about to tell you may explain why certain people around you have been acting strangely, why conversations suddenly changed, why certain opportunities felt too convenient, and why something inside you kept saying, "Don't move yet." They thought they had created the perfect trap for you. They thought every detail was arranged, every person was positioned, every word was carefully chosen, and all they had to do was wait for you to step directly into what they prepared. But they made one mistake. They underestimated the discernment God placed inside you. They expected you to react emotionally. They expected you to become desperate, angry, confused, or impatient. They expected you to prove yourself. But you became quiet. You watched. You listened. You prayed. And while they were celebrating what they thought was your downfall, you were already seeing the pieces they thought you would never notice. Chosen one, sometimes God will not expose the trap by making a loud announcement. Sometimes He exposes it by giving you a strange feeling that tells you to pause. Sometimes He makes you uncomfortable with something that looks perfect on the outside. Sometimes He delays your steps because He can see what your eyes cannot. And that delay you complained about may have been your protection. That closed door you thought was rejection may have been mercy. That person you thought you needed may have been the very person God was separating you from. You have to understand this. Not every opportunity is an opportunity from God, and not every open door deserves to be entered. Some doors are distractions dressed like blessings. Some invitations are designed to pull you away from your purpose. Some people will smile while secretly hoping you make one wrong decision. But God has been teaching you to recognize the difference between what looks good and what is actually good for your spirit. That is why you started noticing things you once ignored. That is why certain words suddenly sounded different. That is why the energy behind certain conversations became obvious. Your discernment became sharper because your relationship with God became deeper. You stopped needing everyone to explain themselves because their actions started speaking loudly enough. And now they are shocked because the version of you they thought they could manipulate no longer exists. They remember the old you, the one who over-explained, chased answers, trusted too quickly, gave too many chances, and reacted whenever somebody pushed the right emotional button. But God has been transforming you. You learned that silence can be wisdom. You learned that distance can be protection. You learned that you don't have to attend every argument you are invited to. You learned that you don't have to defend yourself against every accusation. You learned that sometimes the strongest response is simply refusing to participate. And that is exactly what confused them. They prepared for a reaction, but you gave them peace. They prepared for you to panic, but you prayed. They prepared for you to expose everything, but you remained silent. They prepared for you to chase them for answers, but you walked away. They thought they were controlling the situation, but God was teaching you self-control. And hear me, audience, because this is where somebody needs to receive this message. Your greatest victory may not be proving that you saw the trap. Your greatest victory may be refusing to step into it. You don't need to announce, "I know what you're doing." You don't need to gather a crowd and expose every person who disappointed you. You don't need revenge. You don't need to make them feel what they made you feel. You need to stay aligned with God. Because when God protects you, He doesn't always give you every detail. Sometimes He simply removes your desire to participate. Think about that. You may have once begged for that connection, that opportunity, that relationship, that position, that invitation. Then suddenly, something changed inside you. You stopped forcing it. You stopped chasing it. You stopped caring about being included. You couldn't explain it, but your spirit became settled. That may have been God pulling you away before the trap closed, and now the people who expected you to fall are confused because you didn't. They expected your emotions to become your weakness, but God taught you to govern your emotions. They expected your loneliness to make you desperate, but God taught you that solitude can be preparation. They expected your rejection to make you bitter, but God used it to make you wiser. They expected their silence to make you chase them, but you discovered that peace doesn't require their response. Chosen one, don't let anyone convince you that your growth is arrogance. Sometimes maturity looks like becoming unavailable for the chaos you once tolerated. Sometimes healing looks like no longer explaining your boundaries. Sometimes wisdom looks like leaving without getting the final word. And sometimes obedience to God means walking away from something you desperately wanted because He knows what is waiting on the other side of it. Scripture reminds us that God can give wisdom to those who ask. So ask. Pray before you respond. Pray before you trust. Pray before you sign. Pray before you return. Pray before you reconnect. Don't let pressure make your decisions for you. Don't let somebody else's urgency become your emergency. A trap often depends on speed. It depends on you acting before you think. It depends on emotion overpowering discernment. But when you slow down, seek God, examine the situation, and refuse to be pressured, manipulation loses its power. And maybe that's why they are shocked right now. They thought they knew exactly how you would respond. They thought they had your patterns memorized. They thought they could push the same button and get the same reaction. But you are not who you were. God has taken you through enough storms to teach you how to recognize clouds before the rain arrives. You have experienced enough disappointment to understand that not every smile is sincerity. You have learned enough lessons to know that words mean very little without consistent actions. And most importantly, you have learned that God's voice deserves more weight than people's opinions. So, if something feels wrong, don't ignore it just because everyone else says it looks right. If God is telling you to pause, pause. If wisdom tells you to step back, step back. If the door closes, don't break it down trying to enter. Maybe the closed door is the very thing keeping you safe, and when you look back later, you may realize that what felt like a delay was actually divine protection. What felt like losing was actually escaping. What felt like rejection was actually redirection. What felt like loneliness was actually separation from people who were never meant to walk into your next season. So don't celebrate because they were exposed. Celebrate because you were protected. Don't become obsessed with their downfall. Become committed to your growth. Don't waste your future trying to punish your past. Let God handle what you cannot control. Your assignment is to keep your heart clean, your mind focused, your faith strong, and your steps aligned. The trap didn't destroy you, it revealed your discernment. The pressure didn't break you, it strengthened your character. The betrayal didn't end your story, it taught you who deserved access to the next chapter. And the people who thought they had outsmarted you are now witnessing something they never expected. You didn't need to fight them to overcome them. You simply refused to become what they wanted you to become. So lift your head, breathe deeply, stop second-guessing every decision you made to protect your peace. Stop feeling guilty for walking away from situations that repeatedly disturbed your spirit. You don't have to prove that you are chosen. You don't have to convince anyone that God is working in your life. Keep moving, keep praying, keep building, keep becoming. Because the greatest response to every trap is not revenge, it is purpose. And if God pulled you out before the trap closed, don't go back just because the people who set it are suddenly acting innocent. You saw enough. You learned enough. You survived enough. Now walk forward with wisdom. Let them stay shocked. Let them wonder how you knew. Let them question why you didn't react. You don't owe them an explanation. Sometimes God gives you discernment not so you can expose everybody, but so you can quietly escape what was never meant to destroy you. And when you finally reach the place God has been preparing for you, you'll look back and say, "Now I understand why I couldn't go there. Now I understand why that door closed. Now I understand why I felt uneasy. Now I understand why God told me to wait." The trap was real, but God's protection was greater. They planned the setup, but God planned your escape. They expected your downfall, but God was preparing your elevation. So keep your eyes open, keep your spirit grounded, keep your faith alive, and never forget, when God gives you discernment, don't trade it for temporary comfort. The very thing you thought was slowing you down may have been the hand of God keeping you from falling. And if this message is speaking directly to your spirit, don't ignore it. Take the lesson, protect your peace, trust God's timing, walk away when you need to walk away, and keep moving forward, because the trap they thought would end your story may become the testimony that proves God was protecting you all along. Chosen one, I want you to listen closely, because this is where everything changes. They thought they knew how you would respond. They thought they understood your weaknesses, your emotions, your habits, your reactions, and the exact buttons they could push to make you move according to their plan. They believed that if they created the right circumstances, said the right words, involved the right people, and applied just enough pressure, you would walk directly into the trap they had prepared for you. They were waiting for you to react. They were waiting for you to become angry. They were waiting for you to defend yourself, explain yourself, chase answers, expose everything, or make one emotional decision that would give them exactly what they wanted. But something changed inside you. You didn't react the way they expected. You paused. You watched. You listened. You became quiet. And while they were wondering why you weren't taking the bait, God was giving you something more powerful than an argument. Discernment. Audience, understand this. Discernment does not always arrive as a loud voice telling you, this person is against you. Sometimes, discernment feels like hesitation. Sometimes it looks like losing interest in something you once desperately wanted. Sometimes it sounds like that quiet thought saying, wait, don't answer yet, don't go there, don't trust this too quickly. And sometimes you can't explain why you suddenly feel the need to step back, but you don't have to understand everything before you obey wisdom. There are moments when God protects you by making you uncomfortable in places that look comfortable to everybody else. There are situations where everything appears perfect on the surface, but something within you refuses to settle. That's not necessarily fear. Sometimes that's awareness. Sometimes that's your spirit, recognizing what your eyes haven't fully processed yet. And maybe that's what happened to you. They presented you with something that looked like an opportunity, but you sensed something wasn't right. They gave you an invitation, but you hesitated. They offered an explanation, but their words didn't match their actions. They tried to rush your decision, but something inside you said, slow down. And because you slowed down, you saw what you would have missed if you had moved too quickly. That's why they are shocked. They weren't prepared for the new version of you. They were prepared for the person you used to be, the person who responded immediately, trusted quickly, explained everything, forgave without boundaries, and kept giving people access even after they demonstrated that they couldn't be trusted with it. But you've learned, you've been through enough to know that every smile doesn't mean loyalty. Every invitation isn't an opportunity. Every apology doesn't represent change. And every open door isn't automatically a door God wants you to walk through. You have learned to watch patterns instead of listening only to promises. You have learned to look at consistency instead of being impressed by temporary words. You have learned that somebody can say all the right things while their actions are quietly telling you something completely different. And now your discernment is making you harder to manipulate. You don't have to accuse anybody. You don't have to announce what you see. You don't have to expose every hidden intention. You can simply step back. That's power. Sometimes the strongest response is no response at all. Sometimes the greatest victory is refusing to participate in the situation designed to destroy your peace. They may have expected you to argue, but you became silent. They expected you to chase them, but you stopped chasing. They expected you to beg for inclusion, but you discovered that you don't need to be included everywhere. They expected you to defend your name, but you realized that God knows the truth even when people don't. They expected you to panic, but you prayed. They expected you to make a rushed decision, but you waited. And that waiting disrupted everything they had planned. Chosen one, don't underestimate the power of a person who has learned to pause before reacting. Emotional reactions can make you predictable, but wisdom makes you difficult to control. When someone knows exactly what makes you angry, they can use anger against you. When someone knows exactly what makes you insecure, they can use insecurity against you. When someone knows exactly what makes you desperate, they can create circumstances that make you act against your own interests. But when you become grounded, patient, prayerful, and disciplined, their strategy begins to collapse. They can create pressure, but they cannot control your response. They can spread rumors, but they cannot force you to defend yourself emotionally. They can create confusion, but they cannot make you abandon your peace. They can attempt to provoke you, but they cannot decide what comes out of your mouth. That's the transformation God has been creating inside you. You are learning that not every battle deserves your energy. Not every accusation deserves an explanation. Not every person deserves access to your private thoughts. Not every situation requires an immediate answer. Sometimes you need to step away and let the situation reveal itself. Because when you stop reacting, people begin revealing themselves. When you stop chasing, you discover who actually wanted you around. When you stop explaining, you discover who was committed to misunderstanding you anyway. When you stop giving people endless chances, you discover whether they respected you or simply depended on your lack of boundaries. And when you stop being controlled by the fear of losing people, you become free to recognize who was never meant to remain in your life. That's why they didn't see this coming. They knew the old you. They knew what you tolerated. They knew how quickly you responded. They knew which emotional buttons to push. But they didn't account for what God was doing in your private season. They didn't see the nights you prayed. They didn't see the moments when you had to rebuild yourself. They didn't see how many times you had to choose peace instead of revenge. They didn't see how much wisdom you gained through disappointment. They only saw the outside. They didn't know that every difficult experience was teaching you something. Every betrayal taught you discernment. Every rejection taught you independence. Every delay taught you patience. Every disappointment taught you to look beyond appearances. Every closed door taught you that you don't have to force your way into places God has not assigned to you. So when the trap appeared, you were no longer looking at it with the same eyes. You were looking through everything you had learned. You were noticing details that the old you might have overlooked. You were asking different questions. You were watching behavior instead of getting distracted by words. You were paying attention to what happened when nobody thought you were watching. And suddenly, the perfect trap wasn't so perfect anymore. The pieces didn't fit. The story didn't make sense. The timing was suspicious. The pressure was unnecessary. The urgency felt manufactured. The people involved weren't as genuine as they wanted you to believe. And instead of forcing yourself to ignore those signals, you listened. That's discernment. Discernment doesn't mean you become suspicious of everyone. It means you become wise enough to recognize patterns without allowing fear to control you. It means you can love people without giving everyone unlimited access. You can forgive someone without trusting them immediately again. You can wish someone well without inviting them back into your private world. You can remain kind without remaining available for manipulation. And you can walk away without hatred in your heart. That's maturity. That's growth. That's what happens when you stop letting other people's behavior dictate your identity. So, if you've recently felt like you are seeing situations differently, don't immediately assume something is wrong with you. Maybe you're simply becoming more aware. Maybe you're finally recognizing what you used to rationalize. Maybe God is teaching you to distinguish between genuine connection and convenient association, between real opportunity and dangerous distraction, between correction and manipulation, between love and control. And remember this, discernment isn't about proving that you're smarter than everybody else. It's about protecting what God entrusted to you. Your peace matters, your purpose matters, your time matters, your future matters, and you don't have to sacrifice those things just to make other people comfortable. If somebody is upset because you started asking questions, that's information. If somebody becomes angry because you established a boundary, that's information. If somebody pressures you to decide immediately, slow down. If somebody tries to make you feel guilty for protecting your peace, pay attention. You don't have to accuse them of having evil intentions. Simply observe. Let actions speak. Let time reveal character. Let God expose what you cannot see. Because sometimes God doesn't give you evidence immediately. Sometimes He gives you enough discomfort to stop you from stepping further. And that is enough. Chosen one, the trap didn't fail because you were perfect. It failed because you learned not to react blindly. You learned to pause. You learned to pray. You learned to observe. You learned to protect your peace. And now the very people who thought they could predict your next move are confused because you aren't playing the role they wrote for you anymore. They expected you to move according to their plan, but you started moving according to wisdom. They expected emotion, but you gave them patience. They expected chaos, but you gave them silence. They expected you to chase, but you walked away. They expected you to break, but you became stronger. And that is why they are shocked. Not because you defeated them through revenge, but because you refused to give them the reaction they needed to complete their plan. So keep your peace. Keep your eyes open. Don't allow pressure to rush you. Don't let guilt override wisdom. Don't ignore patterns simply because you want someone to be different. Pray before you respond. Think before you speak. Watch before you trust. And when that quiet inner warning tells you to pause, don't be afraid to pause. You may not know exactly what God is protecting you from, but you can trust the one who does. The trap may have been carefully designed, but your God is wiser than every strategy formed against you. They thought they were setting the perfect trap, but God gave you the discernment to see through it. And sometimes the greatest testimony isn't that you fought your enemies and won. Sometimes the greatest testimony is that you never stepped into the trap in the first place. Chosen one, now listen carefully because there is something you need to understand about what just happened. The trap failed, not because you were stronger than the people who designed it, not because you had every answer, and not because you figured out every detail before it happened. The trap failed because God was protecting you. And sometimes God's protection does not look like a miracle in the way you expected. Sometimes it looks like a delay. Sometimes it looks like rejection. Sometimes it looks like being excluded from a room you desperately wanted to enter. Sometimes it looks like someone suddenly changing toward you. Sometimes it looks like an opportunity disappearing right before you thought it was finally yours. And in that moment, you may have cried, questioned God, wondered what you did wrong, or asked why something you wanted so badly was being taken away. But what if you were never losing it? What if God was removing you from something that would have cost you more than you could see? What if the door closing was not punishment, but protection? What if the thing you called a setback was actually the hand of God pulling you away from a situation that had been carefully positioned to distract you, weaken you, delay you, or destroy your peace? Chosen one, sometimes you have to stop looking at what you lost and start looking at what you escaped. Because there are situations you would be thanking God for today if you could see everything He protected you from yesterday. You might be looking at a closed door and thinking, why didn't God let me have this? But God may be looking at that same door saying, because I knew what was waiting for you behind it. You saw the opportunity. God saw the consequences. You saw the relationship. God saw the hidden motives. You saw the invitation. God saw the environment. You saw the temporary excitement. God saw the long-term damage. You saw what you wanted. God saw what you needed to survive. That's why you cannot always judge God's goodness by how comfortable your current situation feels. Sometimes His greatest protection feels uncomfortable at first. Sometimes He has to separate you from something before you understand why you needed to leave. And I know that is difficult because you wanted answers. You wanted explanations. You wanted somebody to tell you why things suddenly changed. You wanted to understand why people turned cold, why plans fell apart, why that opportunity disappeared, why that connection ended, or why something you prayed for didn't happen the way you expected. But there are moments when God will not give you the entire explanation because He wants you to learn how to trust Him without having every detail. Faith is not always knowing what is happening. Sometimes faith is saying, Lord, I don't understand this, but I trust you anyway. And that is where your strength begins, because when you trust God, you don't have to chase every closed door. You don't have to force every relationship. You don't have to beg every person to stay. You don't have to manipulate circumstances to make something happen. You can release it. You can breathe. You can step back and say, if this is not for me, God, remove it. If this is not aligned with my purpose, close it. If this person is not meant to walk with me, give me the strength to let them go.